Pushane Namaha. Pusha Dhananjayo Vata Sushena Suruchistatha Ghritachi Gautamascheti Tapomasam Nayantyami. Pusha as the sun god, Dhananjaya as the Naga, Vata as the Rakshasa, Sushena as the Gandharva, Suruchi as the Yaksha, Ghritachi as the Apsara, and Gautama as the sage rule the month of Tapas. Namaste everyone. So today we are going to talk about Pushan Aditya, which is a very special form of sun god. Special why? Because sun assumes the form of Pushan Aditya in the 7th house or sign of Libra. And if you know Vedic Astrology at least a little bit, then you know that sun in the sign of Libra is debilitated. Similarly, sun in the 7th house has the lowest digbala or the lowest directional strength. So be it the 7th house or be it the sign of Libra, sun has in a sense the smallest power there. And why it even is considered that way? So first thing which we need to keep in mind, especially when it comes to tropical zodiac, originally the entire tropical zodiac was arranged in such a way that actually autumn equinox would start, sun dwelling in Libra. So actually autumn equinox would be this 0 degree of Libra. And what is happening after autumn equinox? You can see it also all around here, all around nature, that trees are leaving their leaves, entire nature is withdrawing itself, and that solar energy becomes weaker and weaker. Our days become shorter, there is less light. And this is, why sun is considered quite powerless in this placement. So it doesn't have that much power as it could have. But it doesn't mean that it's a bad position for the sun, and that is one big misconception which I really will try my best, to just destroy in this video, literally, because really sun debilitated is not a bad sun. It is sun which is humble, but sun which is humble doesn't mean sun which is evil, doesn't mean sun which is very weak, because everything has its strengths and weaknesses. And we always need to keep that in mind, that nothing is just good or bad. Like even if we think about the planets and planets being exalted or debilitated, how we are calling it in Vedic astrology, in fact exalted planet is just a proud planet, And sometimes exalted planet, I tell you, can give you so much more trouble in a birth chart. Because this planet is very frequently not very willing to improve itself, to work on itself. While when sun is dwelling in Libra, this sun is very humble and it's willing to improve itself. And sun in Libra is also very interesting because you see, sun represents our self itself, our individuality. While 7th house or sign of Libra represents this very individuality that needs to balance itself now with the needs of the society, with the needs of surroundings. So you can think that sun is this primary I, this primary self, the very center of our solar system, right? While 7th house, it's all about you. It's not about me anymore. It's about you and it's about us as well. So this is why sun may feel a little bit disrupted here. Why? Because it will try to seek its sense of self through relationships. This is why sun can become weak. But if you actually truly deeply understand the lesson of this sun, and if you have this placement, sun in Libra or sun in the 7th house, and if you just, explain to yourself that you can never base your sense of self-esteem on what other people are thinking about you, then you can heal this sun as well. So this is one thing that is actually very important, because Sun in Libra or in 7th house is not a bad sun. Libra, in fact, it represents, along with Taurus, our heart chakra, you know. And the beautiful thing is that actually it's considered one of the remedies for the sun when sun is a little bit weak in a birth chart, is to actually imagine the light of the sun in the heart itself. This is why this main prayer chanted by Lord Sri Ram to Sun God is also called Aditya Hridayam. Aditya means the sun, Hridaya means the heart. It's a prayer to Sun God, and it is said that whoever has any issues with the sun, when you chant this prayer, it uplifts your energy. It uplifts the energy of your sun or the self. So in a sense, I would say that having, sun in the heart is not a bad thing. But it definitely means that sometimes you need to even, control your own sensitivity or compassion or empathy, because other people can abuse you if you don't do it wisely, if you don't know where to put your borders. And this is when the sun can actually become weak sometimes, because sometimes it really doesn't know where to put this actual border. So first of all, the major keyword for this placement of the sun in the sign of Libra or sun in the 7th house, is letting go. Why letting go? Because Pushan Aditya, this form of sun god, this is the actual form of sun god which takes your soul and guides it, to the other realms after your death. So Pushan, he's not the god of death, but he's the one who actually directs the soul to the right direction. And because he's so connected, with this, letting go of something, soul actually leaving the body itself. This is why whenever he is dwelling, so when sun is dwelling in the 7th house or in the sign of Libra, we will frequently need to let go of certain concepts, about ourselves. We will need to let go of some relationships also in our life. Especially if these are toxic relationships. So letting go becomes a very, very important thing with sun in that placement, because sun in this placement, it actually tends to attach itself too much to some relations. Because again, keep in mind, if your sun is in the 7th house, or if your sun is in the sign of Libra, it means that most likely you will seek this sense of self-esteem or self-worth through relations. And if you're attaching this sense of self-esteem to some of your relations, it's very understandable that it won't be that easy for you to let go of them when it is time to do so. So this is where, Pushan Aditya will be actually teaching you to let go of things. He will remind you that at the end of the day, everything perishes. Everything ends. Death waits for everybody. And if you actually really think about this truth, it's easier to let go. It's easier then to understand also that certain relationships which we have in this lifetime, they are for this lifetime, And if you think in broader perspective, how many mothers, fathers, children, husbands or wife you had in previous lifetimes, right? So this is how sun in the form of Pushan Aditya tries to bring this perspective to you in this form, if he is dwelling in 7th house or the sign of Libra in your personal birth chart. And because the sun god in the form of Pushan Aditya, he actually guides the soul to its destiny, to its destination place. Interesting thing is that people with sun in Libra or people with sun in the 7th house, in the beginning of life, they might actually lack this sense of direction, So it's a very opposite thing to sun dwelling in Aries, because sun in Aries usually knows very well what it wants and it can be pretty stubborn about it as well. While sun in the 7th house or sun in Libra is sometimes, more indecisive as well, but usually it actually improves with time. And in fact, these people, after some time, they can even have this tremendous ability to actually guide others as well to their destiny. These are people who can become great advisors or even great coaches, and I have really seen that in charts with Sun in the 7th house or Sun in the sign of Libra, because they have this sense of, sensitivity, empathy, and compassion towards other people, and because they experienced themselves not having this clear direction in life, but actually finding it after some time. So that's a very special thing about Sun placed in that way, that these people sometimes really can become guiding lights for others as well, especially due to their humility. And people with Sun in the sign of Libra or Sun in the 7th house are also people who love peace and non-violence. And in fact, if you remember, one person who had a quite packed sign of Libra with planets is Gandhi himself. So that's one very interesting thing actually about this Sun. And this Sun sometimes can actually love peace to such an extent that it can even go into compromising too much on its values. And it may even end up actually just pleasing others. So that's one shadow side to it. But generally these are people who really love peace in all their relations, and they are capable, of lowering themselves in a sense just to support peace, just to maintain peace in their relationships. So that's actually a very beautiful ability which they are having. And this is also because Pushan, you see, is God who actually doesn't have teeth, So there's no violence in him. He just wants to establish peace everywhere. This is why for people with Sun placed in the sign of Libra or Sun placed in the 7th house, it's actually very supportive for them to have purely vegetarian diet. It will really help them actually to sustain, this more peaceful manifestation of Pushan in their charts and Sun God in that place. And in fact, vegetarian diet is something that I would definitely recommend to everybody, because it's a topic which is so dear to my heart, and it's so dear also to our Gurudev, because in fact if we can't respect fellow living beings, and if we can't drop this form of violence in our lives, we are surely going to experience a sort of consequences of that. And in fact, even in Paladipika, astrology scripture, it's written that ahimsa and non-violence is the best remedy, the first and the best remedy. So for the person who is non-violent towards any being, immediately even the negative influences on the sky are going to manifest in a beneficial way. And it's not only non-violence in sense of becoming vegetarian, it's also non-violence in thoughts, non-violence in words as well. Because sometimes we do not even notice how much we can become violent in a very, very subtle way in daily life. So this is why the way of non-violence is really the most recommended way, especially if you want to improve your Sun dwelling in Libra or in the 7th house. And people with Sun in Libra or Sun in the 7th house are also usually people who really comprehend concept of equality. They actually want to balance everything, because Libra is all about balancing things, right? So they always want that everything is balanced and everything is fair. However, unfortunately, when Sun enters this place, when Sun enters Libra or the 7th house, very frequently these people actually face some form of injustice or unfairness in their own life. And this is when they also need to learn how to build their own inner strength to actually oppose that. This is how they need to learn how they build their own, sense of self-worth and self-esteem, not to fall, into this despair just because you faced some form of injustice or unfairness, and not to fall into having completely low self-esteem either, because they may sometimes, attach their feeling of self-esteem too much on what is happening around them, too much on what is happening outside of them. So they need to learn how to balance that, definitely. But their beautiful quality is that they really can actually withdraw themselves, detach themselves from their ego, and just observe you know. Just observe life the way it is and treat everybody equally and treat everybody in a just way. And because equality is so important for them, obviously also righteousness is very important quality for them, in fact. And this is quite logical because you see this place in which Sun is debilitated, so-called, Saturn actually gets exalted. So we cannot forget about this aspect of the sign of Libra. And Saturn also has highest Digbala in the 7th house. So Saturn and Sun are always, in a sense, opposite to each other. But Saturn stands a lot for this sense of justice and sense of righteousness, which is why you can see great lawyers with powerful sign of Libra. And also when the Sun is dwelling in the sign of Libra or in the 7th house, again you can see people who can be not just good lawyers but actually righteous lawyers. So people who are actually capable to sustain righteousness and for whom this sense of righteousness, equality and justice is really, really important in life. So you see, it's kind of similar to Sun dwelling in Taurus, because Sun in Taurus is also very righteous, you know. So this is the similarity between these two signs governed by Venus. And this equality and righteousness, we could say, is so important for those natives because, again, please remember, Pushan Aditya is this form of sun god who actually takes the soul to the final destiny after death. And in death, we are all equal. But in death, we are also all alone. And this is why actually feeling of loneliness or feeling of solitude is something, you know, for which the ego of these people is very sensitive. They actually do not like the feeling of actual loneliness. Which is why very frequently people with Sun in the 7th house or Sun in the sign of Libra, they actually, you know, solitary life very frequently won't be for them, really. They actually need spouse. They need a partner. And interestingly, very frequently they actually rediscover their own power through their partner. So this is, let's say, the most positive scenario which could happen, that person with Sun in Libra or Sun in the 7th house will rediscover his own power and his own self-worth through the partner. But the negative scenario which also can happen is that they can easily attract the partner which will abuse them, which will dominate them, which will control them as well. Because still Sun in this placement is a very clear indication that they will attract a very powerful partner. A partner that in a sense, you know, will be complete opposite of them exactly for this purpose, so they can learn how to exercise their own sense of self-esteem, their own feeling of power, how to go out of their own shadow. And one quality which I personally love a lot with this placement of the Sun, which is either in 7th house or in the sign of Libra, is that these people very often can be really humble in life, you know. They really do not have this need to put themselves in front of everybody else. They can really serve others selflessly, with humility. And that is really beautiful quality of Sun being placed in this way, in the sign of Libra or in the 7th house. However, they need to be a little bit careful also that this humility doesn't manifest as too much of shyness, that it doesn't manifest also as hiding themselves all the time behind others, and that it also doesn't manifest simply as low self-esteem. Because you see, we always mix these two concepts. We think that humility is the same as low self-esteem, and honestly, nothing more misguiding. Because humility is about, you know, just being who you are. This is my definition of humility. Because humility is not putting yourself too high, not putting yourself too low. Being exactly where you are and accepting yourself exactly the way you are. Understanding your strong sides and your weak sides. And very frequently that's exactly what they need to learn in life. Because Libra is also about this, about finding this balance. Accepting that yes, I have a weak side, yes, I have a strong side, but none of these defines me. And that's really the lesson here. Because if otherwise they will try to fall into too low self-esteem. Paradoxical thing is that if we already have low self-esteem, if we already think bad things about ourselves, if we already think negatively about ourselves, we will also completely naturally attract such life situations which will actually confirm that. Because we will seek subconsciously a confirmation of that in the reality. So whatever will happen in our life, we will perceive it as humiliation towards ourselves, right? And it's true, these people, in a sense, we could say they can experience humiliations in life. They can also experience humiliations due to spouse. But very frequently it can be, this silent message to them from the universe to, first of all, not to be so sensitive about their ego, because they can really sometimes take things way too personally. And it is also a message from the universe to try to understand what is a healthy self-esteem, who they truly are, not to try define themselves constantly through all these external things, through their job, through the spouse, through other people, what other people think of me, what other people are gossiping about me, but just to be the way you are. And that's the true lesson from Pushan Aditya. And due to the fact that people with this specific placement can sometimes be a little bit oversensitive about their own ego, they naturally also do not resonate well with authorities. So they can have issues with authorities. And it's interesting, frequently they will not like government also or politics, but they might have even issues with teachers or their bosses. Which is why, with sun being placed in such a way, usually, obviously I look always at the entire chart before I say something like that, but usually for these people it's really better to have their own business. Not to work for anybody else, simply not to experience these issues, with authorities and potential humiliation or feeling that something is done not fair. So that is one thing definitely for you to consider if you are having that placement. And you see, because Sun in the sign of Libra, or more even specifically, Sun in the 7th house, what is the 7th house? That is the setting Sun. And setting Sun is actually very interesting, because setting Sun is always very reddish, right, in color, which is said it's a very romantic sun as well, in a sense. It's the most romantic time of the day, sunset, isn't it? But one very interesting thing about this Sun is, because in Kala chakras, or the wheel of time, this specific direction, west direction, is governed by Venus. And Venus is the planet of self-sacrifice. It really is the planet of self-sacrifice, and it is also the planet, unfortunately, of workaholism. We sometimes do not maybe perceive Venus in such a way, but I have really seen Venus causing that sometimes, in fact. And it makes a lot of sense, because this western direction in Kala chakra, so the wheel of time, is governed by Venus, but in Dik chakra, so the wheel of directions, which is more used in Vastu, is connected to Saturn. So you see this interesting interrelation between Saturn and Venus, and both of them are actual enemies of the Sun. And Saturn feels the strongest in the 7th house. And original 7th house is governed by Venus. So you see, if you look at all these little things, you actually start to perceive how, all little puzzles are coming together. And for people with this placement, they actually do have tremendous ability of self-sacrifice. I mean, they are even capable of literally torturing themselves, for a higher purpose. And you can see this in the life of Mahatma Gandhi, for example. Even though he is not having this placement, but he has very powerful sign of Libra in his birth chart. So that is one thing which is very, very interesting, whenever this sign of Libra becomes so powerful. But what they really, again, need to learn how to balance is not to sacrifice too much. Especially not to sacrifice too much for their relationships. Even if they're sacrificing a lot, maybe to some higher goal, especially if it's spiritual goal, it's even okay. But if they start to sacrifice too much of themselves in relationships to the extent that they actually lose themselves, lose their sense of self, lose their sense of individuality, and lose their sense of self-esteem in a relationship, or to the extent that their partners are starting to abuse them, this is when it's not healthy anymore. So that is one thing to keep in mind when Sun is in that position and assumes a form of Pushan Aditya. And this is actually quite interesting if you also think about the nakshatra, which is governed by Pushan. And this is Revati nakshatra, which is the last nakshatra of the zodiac, the final one, but also the nakshatra in which Venus actually gets exalted. And Venus exalted is all about this self-sacrifice, all about compassion, all about sensitivity, and all about embracing everybody. So people with this placement of the Sun in the 7th house or in Libra also have a little bit of this quality. And when we are talking about Sun in the 7th house or in the sign of Libra, we actually need to mention also a little bit about health, because Sun is the main karaka of health also. So when Sun is a little bit powerless, this is when some issues with health can appear also. And they don't need to be very powerful issues, very strong issues, or something very severe. But what I have personally noticed, especially if Sun is in Swati nakshatra, for example, which is all connected to Vayu, the god of air, the god of wind, breathing issues can happen. Also heart issues can happen sometimes, or issues with blood pressure, because it's also the sign connected with the heart chakra, and also because of this special connection with Vayu-dev. And one more thing that is actually very specific when it comes to Sun in displacement in 7th house or in the sign of Libra. You see, this is actually one piece of advice which you might really consider, because every planet in a birth chart is connected with some specific food which we are eating. And Sun specifically is connected to gluten, actually, wheat products. Which is why very often when people are having very weak or powerless Sun in a birth chart, and this is the situation if you're having Sun in the 7th house or Sun in the sign of Libra, you might really like to avoid gluten. In fact, if possible, cut it completely away from your diet. Do not eat any wheat products. Do not eat anything that contains gluten, and you will really see that you will feel much more energized, much more full of energy. So that is one thing which you might like to keep in mind. And apart from that, again, vegetarian diet is much more supported for you as well. Exactly because of this fact that people with Sun placed in Libra or Sun placed in 7th house, they really have a little bit higher risk of any diseases related to the heart or blood pressure in general, and vegetarian diet actually helps to prevent that. And obviously one important thing also is that, and this is also something in which vegetarian diet will help you greatly, is that this Sun can also experience digestive issues. Issues with digestive fire, that either there will be not enough of digestive fire or there will be way too much of digestive fire. So this is one important thing as well. And this is something with which actually one herb can help you greatly, and that is Bilva. Bilva is a very special herb, and it has a very beautiful and divine story behind it. But it's interesting for you to consider Bilva because in Vedic astrology they often say that actually Bilva is connected to the Sun itself. And if you look at that also from the perspective of nakshatras, actually original 7th house, so the sign of Libra, starts from Chitra nakshatra. And the plant associated with Chitra nakshatra is Bilva once again. So Bilva can be greatly healing for all the natives having displacement, Sun in Libra or Sun in the 7th house. And one thing that I found to be quite peculiar with this placement of the Sun in Libra again, or Sun in the 7th house, and this is actually very interesting. So those natives, they love truth, they love honesty, because Sun is standing for truth and honesty. but because the sun is quite weak in this house, sometimes they might tell, these little white lies. I have really observed that happening. That sometimes, or if they are not telling, these little white lies, somehow, either due to their situation with family or due to their situation with job or anything like that, they might be forced to not always say like 100% of truth, or to even hide the truth sometimes, in fact. This is one other reason why probably you will find actual lawyers with that placement, because you sometimes need to alternate the truth a little bit to prove your point. So they have actually this tendency of alternating truth a little bit. And especially when it comes to truth about themselves, they can become actually extremely sensitive on that level. And this is where, again, they may try, to improve the truth sometimes, in fact. So that is one very, very little thing. It's not a big quality. I'm not saying that they are lying on purpose, but that sometimes, they might not have enough courage to say the truth and to stand by the truth, They might simply rather withdraw themselves and rather even not to speak, rather than say some truth which is actually unpleasant. And ultimately, for those natives, one of the main life lessons is to find this inner power, but to find it in a healthy way. Not to try to find this power in dominance over others, not to try to find this power in their job, in their spouse, in anything that is away from them. And not to feel powerless either, but to find this true source of inner power and inner strength within themselves, instead of trying to attach this sense of power to everything which is outside of them. Because sometimes you see, due to the fact that with this placement, especially when Sun is debilitated in Libra, but also if Sun in the 7th house, this can be experienced, that these people frequently experience in the beginning of life abuse of power. They experience people who are too authoritative, people who are too dominant. And which is why it kind of, I would say, destroys their healthy understanding of what power truly is. Which is why they start to think, okay, power is bad, I do not want that. I would rather be powerless. And this is something they need to heal within themselves, to understand that there is nothing wrong with feeling powerful and strong inside, as long as you remain humble and as long as you have, some healthy understanding about it. So that is just a little bit from me about Pushan Aditya, this form of sun god who presides the 7th house or the sign of Libra. And I'm currently writing, all the time, my ebook about 12 Adityas. It's a very long journey for me, because there will be like at least 50 pages about each of them, each of the Adityas. So if you would like to pre-order it, it's already available. You can find the link below. And next Adityas will be also recorded in their due time. So thank you so much for watching, and see you next time. Namaste.